You may have heard a certain politician say Canada is broken. Broken because of high inflation and the rising cost of living, making life unaffordable for so many Canadians. Now, the man who's been hammering the federal government on the recent record is the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, Pierre Poilievre. And Mr. Poilievre joins us now from Edmonton. Pierre, welcome to Bridge City News.
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
So let's talk about your Canada is broken comment. Many would argue that the rising cost of living has absolutely nothing to do with the Trudeau government, but it's more of a worldwide crisis. How do you respond to that?
It's worldwide among all stupid governments. Those that printed money to fund their spending over the last 2 years have inflation. It's very simple. I didn't say that Justin Trudeau's government was the only incompetent government in the world. I said it was among them. The American government printed money, so did the European Union, so did countless other countries, and they all got inflation. But you know who didn't get inflation? Those that protected their money, like the Swiss. So tell me this, why is it the Swiss have low inflation while the rest of Europe has high inflation? Same supply chains, same needs, same geography, totally different inflation rates. Why? Because the Swiss have their own money, the franc, whereas the Europeans have the euro. The European Union printed cash, the Swiss central bank did not. The Swiss have low inflation, the Europeans have high inflation. Very simple. You print cash, you get inflation. I warned Justin Trudeau that if he printed money, we'd have inflation. What do you know? I was right. And it continues because his inflationary deficits bid up the cost of the goods we buy and the interest we pay. That is entirely predictable. So my common sense plan to bring home lower prices is to cap spending, cut costs, and cut waste in government to bring down inflation and taxes. I'll bring in a dollar for dollar law. Every time my government brings in a new dollar of spending, we'll find a dollar of savings to pay for it. We'll eliminate $1 billion at the CBC. We'll cut corporate welfare. We'll scale back on contracts for consultants, which gobble up $20 billion a year. All these savings will bring down and eliminate the deficit, balance the budget, and combat inflation. By the way, I'm going to get rid of the carbon tax, because when you tax energy, you tax everything. Because everything either has to be heated or moved, and energy is required to do that. So this energy tax makes everything more expensive. A Poilievre government will axe the carbon tax to bring down inflation for Canadians.
Yeah, the carbon tax went up again on April the 1st, making it that much more expensive for Canadians to fill up their cars and heat their homes. Why do you think the message of how much Canadians are struggling right now is simply not getting through to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau?
Because he's out of touch. He spends his time with the elites at the World Economic Forum that support printing money, government takeovers, and control of our lives. And they're all supporting. They all support this agenda because it makes them rich. The inflationary policies enrich the global multinationals as their asset values rise, but it destroys the working class as their purchasing power falls. Justin Trudeau spent $6,000 on a hotel room for one night, and he sent you the bill. That's the lifestyle he's accustomed to living. I have a different background. I was born to a teenage mom who put me up for adoption to school teachers that raised me in Calgary to believe that it didn't matter where you came from, it mattered where you were going. Didn't matter who you knew, but what you could do. That's the country my wife came to as a refugee, and the one we want our kids to inherit. That's the country we're going to restore, where hard work pays off, where the common people are respected, where we bring home jobs and opportunity to our people.
Now, a recent survey found that 60% more Canadians per month are expected to use food banks and other support programs that are available. The federal government recently offered some financial support to low-income Canadians and our seniors, but you say it's simply not enough?
Well, I say it's just pouring fuel on the fire. Whenever you send out checks by the government, all that does is bid up the cost of things. The answer is to stop raising prices in the first place. So instead of taxing our food with a carbon tax and inflating our prices with big multi-billion-dollar deficits, and then sending out checks to compensate people for the damage you've done, why not just stop doing the damage in the first place, right? Cap spending, cut waste, to bring down inflation, and taxes axe the carbon tax. Instead of creating more cash, why don't we create more of what cash buys, grow more food, build more homes, produce more energy here in Canada? Think of it this way. You got 10 loaves of bread. and $10. It's $1 a loaf. If you double the number of dollars to 20, but you still only have 10 loaves of bread, well, now it's $2 for each loaf. So instead of doubling the cash, what if we double the number of loaves of bread we bake? So you have 20 loaves of bread with $10. All of a sudden, the price of bread's gone down to 50 cents a loaf. So that's the equation. Stop creating cash, start creating more of what cash buys. And that's what a Poilievre government will do. It's common sense. So let's bring it home.
Let's talk about Bill C-11 for just a moment here. Now, members within your own party, including Lethbridge MP Rachel Thomas, have expressed major concerns over this bill. She says Ottawa should not regulate what you see, hear, or post online. Now, the federal government says it's simply supporting more Canadian content. How do you see it?
Well, what's Canadian content? The government doesn't decide what's Canadian content. The 39 million Canadians should decide that. It's ironic that Justin Trudeau, of all people, is talking about promoting Canadian identity. He has said Canada has no identity. That is his view. He says we are a post-national country with no distinct identity. And so how could he possibly have a bill that promotes Canadian identity by controlling the internet? It's not about promoting Canadian identity. It's about promoting him and his woke ideology. He wants to put the woke CRTC in charge of manipulating social media algorithms to determine what you see and say on the internet. That's the problem. I don't believe that we should have a tiny clique in Ottawa decide what you see and say. I think your clique should decide what you see and say. I believe in a free internet, and that's why Pierre Poilievre government will axe C-11 and restore freedom of expression for Canadians.
Now, we have a major opioid crime and homeless crisis in many cities across Canada, including right here in Lethbridge in southwestern Alberta. Pierre, let me ask you, what is your solution for addressing these very important issues?
It's common sense. We'll replace the NDP Liberal catch and release for repeat violent offenders with jail, not bail. Those violent offenders who've committed many crimes, who get arrested anew, should be behind bars, not out on early bail or parole. 2, I'll stop giving out taxpayer-funded drugs. So-called safe supply, in theory, was supposed to give addicts drugs that wouldn't kill them. It's done exactly the opposite. They take the government-funded drugs and they sell them to kids. Why? Because they're not powerful enough. And so they sell them to kids, take the profit, and use it to buy fentanyl. That kills the addict. It gets the kids hooked on the hydromorphine provided by the government. The kids find after a while that's not strong enough. So what do? They sell the hydromorphine to another kid, who then gets addicted, and then they buy fentanyl and they kill themselves. So my policy is rehabilitation and treatment, not taxpayer-funded drugs. Finally, I'm going to sue pharmaceutical companies that caused the crisis in the first place. They're the ones that flooded our healthcare system with opioids. I'll sue them, and I'll use the money recovered to pay for the treatment and recovery that's required. So to summarize, jail, not bail, for repeat serious violent offenders. 2, stop taxpayer-funded drugs. Instead, go with treatment and rehabilitation. And of course, finally, sue Big Pharma to make them pay for it.
You know, we have a severe doctor shortage across many provinces, including right here in Alberta. The UCP provincial is doing its part by bringing in more internationally trained physicians and creating a scenario to incentivize more students to get into the healthcare field. What is your solution, Pierre, federally to the healthcare crisis here in our country?
Well, there's 2 common sense solutions. First, I would say that these idiotic vaccine mandates have to go. Believe it or not, there's still hospitals that have vaccine mandates in place that shut out our doctors and nurses and deprive our patients of treatment. Get rid of the vaccine mandates now. They were never justified, but even if you supported them at one point, how is it possible that you can go into a nightclub and kiss a perfect stranger smack on the lips, but you can't go to work without a vaccine? It's obviously not science, it's politics, and it needs to end so we can get our doctors and nurses back. 2, we need to stop discriminating against immigrant and foreign trained doctors. We need 40,000 doctors in Canada. We have 20,000, almost 20,000 immigrant doctors banned from working in their field. Why? Because they were trained abroad. Why not test them and whether they're qualified to meet our standard? This is what I'll do. I'll bring in a national Blue Seal standard for all the professions that involves a test so that an immigrant professional can get an answer within 60 days of applying to work in a profession based on their tested ability, not based on where they come from. And then if they do get licensed, they can work anywhere in Canada, move around the country. We already have a red seal for the trades. Let's bring in a blue seal for the professions. Second, I'll back up 30,000 small study loans for immigrants who need a short time off work to study up to the Canadian standard and get licensed to practice. And three, I'll put in place a system that allows future immigrant professionals to begin credentialing before they even arrive, so that right when they get off the plane, they're licensed to practice, get into our hospitals as doctors and nurses to serve our patients and build big, powerful paychecks for themselves and their families.
Now, here in Alberta, we not only rely on agriculture, but also the oil and gas sector. If the CPC were to form government, what legislation would you cancel and what bills would you bring forward to not only support our farmers, but also the energy sector?
I'd repeal C-69 and C-48. C-69 is the anti-energy and anti-pipeline law that the NDP Liberal coalition brought in. That coalition bill has blocked pipelines, blocked the Tech Frontier Mine, and countless other projects. I'll repeal that. Secondly, I will support natural gas. One of the greatest gifts we could give the world to reduce greenhouse gases is to replace coal-fired electricity with clean Canadian natural gas. We have 1,300 trillion cubic feet of natural gas beneath our feet, but we cannot get it to market because we don't have a single solitary export terminal on either of our coasts, even though there were 18 of them proposed when Trudeau took office. The Americans have built 7 in the same time as we built 0. The Germans built an import terminal in 194 days. We haven't built a single export terminal in 8 years. What I'll do is give quick, responsible permitting to build natural gas liquefaction on both the west and east coast. We have massive advantages over the Americans. We have a shorter shipping distance to both Asia and Europe, and we have cold weather, which means it's 25% cheaper to liquefy gas here than it is in this US Gulf Coast. So a Poilievre government will quickly approve these projects. We will liquefy that gas, put it on a ship, send it to Asia to replace dirty coal fire with clean Canadian gas, and we'll ship it over to Europe to break European dependence on Putin and turn dollars for dictators into paychecks for our people. It's common sense. Let's bring it home.
How about maybe the potential of bringing back Energy East?
I'm for that. There's no business right now that's proposing it. Energy East would have been fantastic. If we had it in place today, we'd be moving 1 million barrels of Western oil to the East Coast, which could have been going to Europe to replace something like a fifth of all the Russian oil that the Europeans are buying. But of course, Trudeau killed the Energy East pipeline. The NDP opposed it. I would support it if a business came back. Obviously, you'd have to see the specific proposal. It has to be a good, environmentally responsible proposal. But in principle, I think a national pipeline makes sense.
Pierre, my kids are leaving Southern Ontario simply because they're going broke. They say, Dad, we can't handle it out here anymore. We can never afford a house out here. The cost of living is through the roof. Small bungalows built in the 50s and 60s in Toronto and Vancouver are still selling for over $1 million or more. So what will it take to make home ownership more affordable for Canadians, especially young Canadians?
Well, it's very simple. Build homes and bring down interest rates. It's not a complicated formula. We have too few homes and too high interest rates. That's why it's expensive. So let's just unpack the problem here. First of all, it's not a global problem. It's not a problem it's not a long-term problem either. It's a here and now problem. Housing was cheap 8 years ago before Trudeau. You could buy a house for an average house, 450 grand when Harper left office. The average mortgage payment on a new home was $1,400. Now, the average house costs almost $800,000, and the average mortgage payment is $3,200. The average down payment has doubled as well. The average rent has doubled. And Canada has one of the worst housing bubbles in the world. Vancouver is ranked 3rd in the world for the inaffordability of housing, ahead of Singapore, London, England, Manhattan, and countless other places with more money, more people, and less land. We have the fewest houses per capita in the G7, even though we have the most land to build on. That doesn't make any sense. How is it possible that we have expensive housing? We have more land, lumber, and labor than anyone else. The answer is government gatekeepers block housing construction. We're ranked 64th in the world for the time it takes to get a building permit. It takes 7 to 10 years to get zoning approved for a new house, a new community. So here's what this is municipal, but here's what a Poilievre government will do. I will demand municipalities speed up and lower the cost of building permits, or I'll cut their infrastructure budgets. I'll give a building bonus to those municipalities that speed up permitting, and I'll bring in fines for those who block building. I'll require every federally funded transit station be surrounded by and even have building over top of by high-density apartments so young people and seniors can live right next to the bus and train. I'll sell off 6,000 federal buildings that we don't need and turn that into housing. I'm going to sell off brownfields that are not being used and turn that into housing as well. And I'll support the trades so we get more of the people that can actually build the house. In other words, we're going to get the gatekeepers out of the way and bring homes people can afford. And then on interest rates, does the federal government set interest rates directly? No. But its monster deficits put upward pressure on rates. When you balance the budget, that tends to bring interest rates down. And so I'm going to get rid of the deficits so that rates can get back down to a lower level so that mortgage payments are more affordable.
Pierre Poilievre, leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, thanks so much for joining us today from our provincial capital in Edmonton.
Wonderful. Great to be with you, my friend. It's a real pleasure. I can't wait to get down to Lethbridge to see you in person. And let's keep building the common sense of the common people and bring it home.